I'm Batman, and this is Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in my Bat Cave and answer all your questions about the First World War or Batman. Tristan Revour writes, could you tell us something about the smaller European states like Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, San Marino, Monaco, and Andorra? A few of them were at the war too, weren't they? What were their roles at this time? Liechtenstein very much gravitated towards Austria-Hungary during the war because of Liechtenstein's geographic location. The ruling prince had a vested interest in Austria-Hungary winning the war, as many of the noble estates were within the Habsburg Empire. And actually, much of the country's wealth was sourced from the empire. In spite of this, Liechtenstein was neutral during the conflict, and it had been a neutral nation since the Austro-Prussian War of 1866. When Austria-Hungary, spoiler alert, eventually lost the war, Liechtenstein was devastated economically and was forced to form a customs union with neighboring Switzerland. San Marino was quite dependent on Italy, but also declared its neutrality when Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. Now this, let's just say it displeased the Italians, who believed that San Marino might harbor Austro-Hungarian spies. As a result, they tried to establish a forced occupation with their own police force, and when San Marino refused to comply, they cut the San Marino telephone lines. Two groups of 10 volunteers from San Marino joined the Italian army. The first group were actually combat people, and the second served in a military hospital. When the Austro-Hungarians discovered the existence of this hospital, they cut all diplomatic ties with San Marino. There was a great deal of political unrest in Monaco during this period, since there was a revolution in 1910 that had ended the absolute rule of the princes. But Prince Albert I suspended the new constitution during the war. Monaco played no real role during the war, but in July 1918, a treaty was signed agreeing that Monaco's protection was France's responsibility. The, I guess, funniest case of the principalities has to be that of Andorra, which declared war on Germany during World War I, but took no part in any fighting. This state of war existed until 1958, since Andorra was not included in the Treaty of Versailles. Now, we already talked about Luxembourg in a previous Out of the Trenches episode. Vahith Naka asks, as far as I'm aware, the front line on the Western Front stretched from the English Channel to the Swiss border. But the vast majority of the action and carnage along the Western Front happened in northern France and Belgium. Were soldiers posted to defend the front far away from the sectors with the most of the major fighting? If so, did soldiers enjoy a better quality of life than their compatriots fighting in northern France and Belgium? Thanks for the great work you guys create. We create great work, guys. Yeah, you're welcome. There were a few quiet sectors dotted along the Western Front, sure, where a little fighting took place. These areas could prove quite useful, especially for, say, American troops who used these sectors for training purposes when they arrived in France in 1918. In these areas, both sides often had an attitude of live and let live, with neither one of them firing on one another. There was a tacit agreement between both sides, where they would often discharge their weapons in a, I guess, ritualistic way to give the impression that fighting was taking place to those in command. This wouldn't happen across an entire sector, but among small platoons or companies, where sentries would refuse to fire on exposed enemy soldiers. These soldiers were lucky, and as a result, sure enjoyed a better quality of life in the sense that they had a greater chance of surviving a stint at the front. Some even spoke of leaving their trenches and sitting in the grass behind them, reading books and letters. Many were able to customize their trenches without enemy fire, and some, and I'm not making this up, even brought pianos into their dugouts for entertainment. In some cases, it was courteous for both sides to not fire on each other while they were eating dinner, when the smoke from the cooking fires was spotted. A letter from a German soldier named August Balde even talks of a Frenchman who would eat with the Germans in their trench when he knew that it was time for dinner. Okay, in spite of this, they still had to suffer the same boredom that other soldiers did in the trenches. And they were also at the mercy of the weather, of course. Now, high command was often wary of this inaction and would analyze casualty lists to see if such a lull had taken hold of certain areas. They would order patrols and raids into enemy trenches to cultivate the offensive spirit among the troops. Now, this was hated by some troops, and on occasion they would warn the enemy with a message, tied to a stone and thrown over, of incoming artillery and what time it would take place. Some would even blow a whistle to alert the enemy of the impending shells so that they would have time to take cover. Raids became compulsory for all regiments, but sometimes reports of raids were actually invented. Now, the British High Command, they gave orders that a strand of German barbed wire had to be brought back to prove that the company had visited the enemy trench. So one group of raiders found a solution to this. They brought back a large coil of German barbed wire and just would continuously cut pieces off of it every time a raid was ordered. But the live and let live policy depended not just on the sector, but also on the troops facing one another. Like, the Germans did not like the Highland regiments from Scotland, and the British didn't get on with the Prussians, but they sometimes got on with the Saxon regiments. The live and let live climate was fragile on its own anyway, though, and of course it was often broken by lethal force. The loss of comrades on both sides made good intentions toward one another hard to sustain. Stories of prisoners being shot after having surrendered on both sides also fueled animosity. Okay, that's all for today. I didn't get any questions about Batman, but maybe next time. But seriously, this episode of Out of the Trenches was shot while we were on the road, we still are on the road, in France, shooting in the Verdun area, and right now we're in Romagna at the Romagna 1418 Museum, which is, as you can see, a fantastic museum of all sorts of amazing stuff that Jean-Paul de Vries, who runs the museum, just found over the years. I mean, hundreds of thousands of things that he's found in the field. So if you're ever here, you should definitely check it out. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.